Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new Deck Tech here on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. It is Sunday, December 13th, my 7-year wedding anniversary at the time of recording. My wife is out, and I thought I would get this in really quick this week. This is our weekly Deck Tech. This is something that I look forward to these days. Did one last week. Have had, the 2020 of 2020s, if I do say so myself. But today we talk about something that brings me a little bit of joy, and that's Gruul. Because if you know me, you know I love Gruul. So with that being said, let's get into this. Gruul Adventures is a deck that many would say is maybe the best deck in Standard. Top 3 pretty easily. And I want to talk about it today. I'm going to read off the deck list, and then I want to talk about some kind of individual card choices. We have 4 Edgewall Innkeeper. Edgewall Innkeeper, I believe, right off the bat, is one of the most important cards in this Standard format. I actually think that sequencing with this card might be the most important thing in this Standard. Understanding when you're supposed to play it and what you're supposed to do against it is really important. Similar to Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves, understanding the sequencing for this card is much more complicated to play with and against, and understanding how you can kind of get the most out of this, plus your adventure creatures, things like that. We have 2 Primal Mites, 2 Ember Shieldbreakers, 2 Scavenging Ooze, 4 Brushfire Elementals, 4 Shatterskull Smashing, 4 Bonecrusher Giant, 4 Lovestruck Beast, 4 Kazandu Mammoth, 1 the Akroan War, 2 Gemraiser, 2 Questing Beast, 3 Embercleave, and 2 the Great Henge. I believe we have 20 lands if I'm not mistaken, putting us to 28 with our spell lands, with 4 Mountain, 8 Forests, 4 Pathway, and 4 Fabled Passage. This does leave our dual lands at only 4. That's right, there are not temples in this list. This mana base is the exact same as Autumn Burchett's. Watching Autumn as they have completely dominated Magic recently has been, honestly, one of the funnest things to watch in the last couple of years in Magic. Autumn is a super nice person who is extremely humble, and getting the chance to play some of Autumn's Dimir cube with them in Vegas was one of my highlights, and watching their reaction to Brad Nelson retweeting them. They're just a really cool person, and seeing their success, I just want to give them a shout out as we do this deck tech, because I think they're pretty cool. Anyway, with that being said, I want to, a lot of this is inspired by Autumn, but I am not nearly as good at Magic as Autumn, and I have made some changes for both ladder play and for events on kind of how I see the format right now. We talked a little bit about Edgewall Innkeeper and the importance of that card. And your adventure package here is 2 Ember Shieldbreaker, 4 Bonecrusher Giant, and 4 Lovestruck Beast. And I think that right now, this is the best thing to do. Between the Great Henge, Embercleave, Stonecoil Serpent, Glass Casket, there are so many artifacts that Ember Shieldbreaker really does get a lot of value. One thing that you'll notice that's a little bit different in this list is I am playing the Gemraisers. Typically, Gemraiser is going to go on something like a Brushfire Elemental, a Scavenging Ooze, or a Mammoth. And you want to make sure that you kind of understand where your Gemraiser needs to go, as your Edgewall Innkeepers and your human tokens can't carry it. But, Autumn's listed have 3 Ember Shieldbreakers. I think that's totally reasonable. If you don't want the Gemraisers and you want that other Shieldbreaker and that other Embercleave, I totally say go for it. I think it's totally reasonable. Overall, I think the main deck is pretty straightforward. You are an aggressive mid-range deck. Mid-range being the large creature deck that's trying to get value out of your cards, whether it's the Great Henge, whether it's Edgewall Innkeeper, large creatures such as Lovestruck Beast, Gemraiser, Scavenging Ooze, Questing Beast. And your deck plays very different on the play and the draw. I think Brushfire Elemental is probably the perfect example of that, along with something like Mammoth. The deck has the ability, kind of like the mono green deck, to kind of just win with like a 2-drop into Mammoth into their dead pretty easily. So it can have some really aggressive draws. And I think that one of the most important pieces of this deck is figuring out, where am I at this game? Am I on the player of the draw? Where do I want this game to end up? Do I have Embercleave in my hand? Am I drawing towards an Embercleave? Do I have a Great Henge in my hand? Am I playing towards Great Henge? And understanding kind of where your end game is leading and where you want to fit into things is really important. And also understanding, like I said, the sequencing of Edgewall and Keeper. I kind of actually hope to do an episode on this for like a podcast on this deck. So I don't want to dive too deep into this because I think it's a lot longer than a deck tech requires. But understanding when to play your Edgewall Innkeeper, when to send a creature on an adventure versus just draw a card off of it, is a really important piece, especially understanding what removal spells your opponents could have that would maybe make you want to play your Edgewall Innkeeper. Are you on the player of the draw? Things like that, I think, really impact this deck's win percentage. You know, I've talked about a lot of Gruul decks on this channel. Probably too many, to be honest. But I do think this is actually one of the harder Gruul decks to play. And it could be where I'm at in Magic right now. This deck is more difficult. But I actually think the sequencing is really tough. Understanding how to use your Mammoths. Understanding what to do on the player of the draw. Understanding, you know, the value of something like a Scavenging Ooze being on the board or when to activate it. Where it sits in a matchup. Things like that are really hard to understand, and this deck really cares about your mulligan decisions, making it just all around just a really intense deck to try and pick up. I think that we've kind of talked about some of the key cards in the main deck, the overall game plan, right? If you're on the Great Henge plan, you want to go long. If you're on the Embercleave plan, you want to beat down. And that can be oversimplified, right? There are plenty of times where you're slowing down the game and then just start attacking with an Embercleave and just, you know, pivot, right? This deck, just like a lot of aggressive mid-range decks, is able to pivot really well. I had a game the other day where I had 3 Lovestruck Beasts, and I was holding an Edgewall Innkeeper in my hand, waiting for the opportunity to play it, and play a Bonecrusher Giant in the same turn, and attack with those 3 Lovestruck Beasts against a mono-red opponent. That had, you know, the crazy board, Embercleave, stuff like that. And understanding where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to pivot with this deck against other aggro decks, how you're supposed to sideboard is going to help you a lot in those games. One of the things that's a little weird in this deck that I found personally is Questing Beast. Questing Beast is... It is big... but not as big as you would expect in the standard format, and it costs a lot of mana. I don't know how to explain it. Questing Beast is one where it's either like one of the best cards on the battlefield or one of the worst, to the point where obviously I'm only playing 3 Embercleave, making it even worse. Questing Beast, however, you know, you kind of want it to trade in a lot of situations to kind of clear the board for your smaller creatures. The Death Touch is really important, and the Vigilance against Mono Red is chef's kiss. The Great Henge is something that, this is kind of what I was hoping for the Great Henge when it was previewed. This is what I wanted this card to be. This value card that let my big green decks draw cards, gain life, get bigger, keep the game going, and it has probably won more games than any card in this deck. Maybe other than Scavenging Ooze. Maybe it's... I mean, but the Great Henge is involved in all of those games too. It is really something else. Brushfire Elemental is a card that I think is so much better on the play than the draw. Being able to understand how to save your fetch lands for Mammoth and Brushfire. One of the things I like about this deck, by the way, and it was really funny, I think the first thing that my former Constructive Criticism co-host Matt Kling said to me about other Gruul decks is how much he hated Evolving Wilds. And I was like, dude, me too, but like, what are you going to do? And apparently you're just going to have bad mana and be happy with it, which is what this deck has decided to do. And it makes mulliganing so much more important and, you know, kind of making you understand where it's at. With this deck specifically, it's really funny to have a 28 land deck with as rough as mana as I believe that this deck has. I think that mostly covers it for the main deck. I think we talked about all the key cards. Bone Crusher Giant has been one of the best cards in Standard. Lovestruck Beast is obviously insane. Scavenging Ooze is really important in this Standard format and can be good in the mirror against blue-black, kind of all over the place. And we already covered Shieldbreaker. So let's move on to the sideboard. In the sideboard, we have 3 Chain Web, 2 Fiery Prophecy, 2 Wilt, 2 Soulseer, 2 Mora via Crow and War, 1 Gruul Unleashed, 1 Ox of Agonis, and 2 Vivian Monsters Advocate. One of the things that I really like about this sideboard is its ability to pivot your deck. Whether or not you want Embercleave in a certain games, whether or not you want Shieldbreaker or Brushfire Elemental or Questing Beast, you have a lot of options to go more value driven between Vivian, between Ox, between Garruk, between removal spells like Fiery Prophecy and Soulscar and Wilt. You have a lot of options to pivot with this sideboard. And if there's one piece of advice I could get you to go from winning early games of Platinum and Diamond, or starting your events 2-0 just from having a really good deck that's really aggressive, I think that it is understanding play versus draw sideboarding, understanding your packages, right? What is Garruk for? It's for the Team of Ramp decks. What is the Crow and War for? If they're leaving in, some of their large creatures, it's for the same thing. It's for the mono green decks. Vivian can come in against control. It can come in the mirror, on the draw. There's so many things. Wilt. When do I want Wilt? Do I think that my opponent has left in Embercleave? Do I want this against Doom Foretold? How do I play with this card? I have Chain Webs. I know that we talked about Autumn earlier, and they did not have Chain Web. Instead, I think that they had 2 Phoenix and 2 Ox. For me, I think that Blue-Black is the second best deck in the format behind Gruul, and I think that Chain Web is the best card against them. But also understanding how your deck will function against that deck, what their deck is trying to do, what version of that deck that they are playing, is all really important to break down into how do I get my deck to be in its best position. Because there's a lot of moving pieces with this Gruul deck. We talked about its ability to pivot, but at the same time, there are games where you don't want that ability to pivot, right? Like, I don't want Brushfire Elemental and Embercleave on the draw in some games. And that seems counterintuitive, right? Like, you would think I would always want to be the beatdown with a deck with Brushfire Elemental and Embercleave, but you don't always have to play those cards. And I think that is kind of the key to sideboarding with this deck. And also, the thing about Bone Crusher Giant is only deals 2 damage. And there are a lot of games where I shave on Bone Crusher Giants because it's just not killing enough relevant things. And understanding that and being able to say, okay, well, what do I need to keep myself on the board, able to be the beatdown in certain games, or where does this card leave me in those sideboarded games? One of the things that I found really funny is how popular mono green has gotten. I think that mono green food is the 3rd best deck, and I think it is quite good. And I do think that it is quite good specifically against this deck. And you have to know that where your games sit and how you can win those games when playing this deck. And to be honest, it's going to be rough. I think that that's just a fact. I think that if we looked at the win percentage, Dimir had one of the best win percentages, Dimir Rogue specifically, across everything from that Mythic Championship weekend. And I think its only bad matchup was Gruul. So you're good against the best deck, you're bad against mono green, but you have game plan against everything. And as much as I want to sit down and give you guys a sideboard guide for every single matchup, this is evolving for me, understanding where the format is at, where I could be, and I think that there's a play versus draw type of thing. If you do have a matchup and you want to know how I would sideboard specifically for a given matchup, leave a comment, and I will respond to your comment with how I would sideboard, 100%. So thank you everybody so much for watching this week. It's a shorter deck tech. I think that I want to do a podcast episode on Gruul here in the next couple weeks, whether it's on Mythicast, guesting on CCMTG, stuff like that. So check out those podcasts. Don't forget that if you have the time to head on over to Patreon to subscribe to Easy Game Media if you like that type of content. But thank you everybody so much for watching. This deck is a ton of fun. I believe it's the best deck in Standard. This is the list that I would play whether I'm grinding ladder or I'm playing an event. This is it. This is the Standard deck that I would play. I would not even change a card. So thank you everybody so much for watching, and we'll see you guys all next time with another deck tech on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel.